In this episode, I'm going to explain what factoring is and why it's essential in math. What up, what up? I'm Anthony, and welcome to another episode of I Like Math. And today we're going to learn about factoring. See, factoring is a math operation. It's something you do to a number. Now, with the other math operations, you were given two or more numbers to work with. But with factoring, you only get one number. Because factoring is like being given the answer to a multiplication problem and then going back and trying to figure out what that multiplication problem was. So in a way, you can think of factoring as unmultiplying. When you multiply, you take two numbers together and multiply them to get one number. And when you factor, you take one number, then you figure out the two numbers that you can multiply together to get that one number. For example, let's say you're asked to factor the number 10. Now that means that you need to figure out what numbers you can multiply together to get 10. If you know your multiplication table, you'll remember that 2 times 5 equals 10. That means that 2 and 5 are factors of 10. So factors are just a part of the multiplication problem. And factoring them is just finding out what those parts are. I'm pretty sure a lot of y'all are thinking like, why do I even need a factor? Which, that is a good question, but I have an even better answer. Factoring can make solving some math problems very easy. For example, factoring is really useful for simplifying fractions. By breaking a number up into factors, you can get rid of some factors that we really don't even need. But for now, we're just going to focus on what factoring is and how to use it. So let's see another example. Let's factor the number 24. For this one, let's just use the multiplication table. Let's see. 4 times 6 is 24. So that means that 4 and 6 are factors of 24. But wait, I'm sure some of you have seen that 3 times 8 is also 24. And that is true. We could have decided to factor 24 into 3 times 8 instead. So which one of the factors is right? Is it 4 and 6 or is it 3 and 8? To be honest, they're both right. See, there can be more than one way to factor a number. And I can see how that might make factoring confusing at first. I'm pretty sure you're used to getting one answer, which is something you commonly see when you're adding, subtracting, and you're multiplying and dividing. And you always get that one answer. But here's not the case. When you factor or unmultiply a number, you might find that there's more than one correct way you can do it. We can see that the number 24 has quite a few factors. 4 is a factor, 6 is a factor, 3 is a factor, and 8 is a factor. The fact that each of these numbers is a factor of 24 means that each of them can divide evenly into 24. And when I say divide evenly, it'll divide without a remainder. For example, if we take our first factor 4 and divide it into 24 using a calculator, our answer will be 6. 4 divides into 24 6 times with no remainder. But what if we try to divide 24 by a number that isn't one of our factors, like the number 7? That did not divide in evenly because there's a big remainder. So what we just did was called testing for divisibility. Testing for divisibility is a way of finding out if a number is a factor of another number. With the test we just did, we confirmed that 4 is a factor of 24, but 7 is not. Sometimes you may be asked to find all the factors of a number. If that happens, you can use testing for divisibility to solve that problem. To see how it works, let's try to find all of the factors of 24. We already tried 4 of them, but there's still a lot more numbers that we can test. Fortunately, we only have to test numbers that are half of the number that we're currently testing. And since half of 24 is 12, we just need to test the numbers 1 through 12. To keep things nice and neat, let's list the numbers we're going to test, and we'll circle the factors that we already know. 3, 4, 6, and 8. We can also cross out the 7 since we already tested it and found it wasn't a factor. Alright, so for the numbers we haven't tested yet, let's start with 1. So 1 is always a factor. And since 1 is a factor, then that means 24 is also a factor because 1 times 24 equals 24. Now, it might sound crazy that a number is a factor of itself, but it always is the case. Knowing that helps you start listing your factors because you always are going to have 1 and the number itself. Now, let's move on and test the number 2. If we divide 24 by 2, we get 12. So 2 is a factor because it divided evenly. You can factor 24 into 2 times 12. That means that we can also circle 12 as a factor of 24. Anytime you do a divisibility test and the number you are checking passes the test, then the answer you get from dividing will also pass the test. It will also be a factor. Alright, so let's move on to the next number we haven't checked, 5. 24 divided by 5 equals 4.8. That didn't divide evenly because our answer is a decimal number. That means that 5 is not a factor of 24. Next, we'll try 9. 24 divided by 9 equals 2.66666, and so on. So we already know that's not a factor. Alright, so what about 10? 24 divided by 10 equals 2.4. Nope. That's the decimal number, so 10 is not a factor. So the last number that we have is 11. Okay, so 24 divided by 11 equals 2.181818, and so on. And that's not a factor either. Since we tested all the numbers that are half of 24, we found all of the possible factors, and they are 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 12, and 24.
Look at this. Somebody come look at this. Look at this. Somebody come and look at this. Look at this.
Now, I know that may look like it's too much, but to be honest with you, you may not have that many problems like that to do. The important thing is to know what factoring is and how to factor, and also how to use testing for divisibility. And I don't have to tell you, because you already know that this is why I like math. Until next time. See you.